I heard the clinking of chains before I even learned my name. That sound was the first word the earth spoke to me, as if red-hot iron was branding itself straight into my heart. It sliced through the air so sharply that even a child understood. Do not cry loudly, or a shadow in a white hat would come and tie a new knot in the rope. I buried my tears deep inside long before I ever learned to smile. They gave me the name Rosalind on a day when the sun stood high overhead and the dust burned my feet. I was born beyond the wide river, where cotton fields stretched farther than the eye could see. The mistress touched my forehead and decided that my silence was a good sign. I would sew dresses. Since then, the needle had become an extension of my fingers. At night, I would hold it like a feather and write invisible letters to the stars, calling myself another name, one that could only be entrusted to the wind. Every dawn smells of ground grain and kitchen smoke. We step out of the barracks while the sky is still gray. The wooden door creaks, as if it wants to hold us inside. But we walk to the shed where cotton sacks stand taller than a man. First work, then water. The master's son pours coffee and smiles as if he is spinning our fear in his palms. He loves silence. He says it makes the skin soft. I am afraid when he stands too close and catches the needle if it falls. There is a dangerous boredom in his eyes. Sometimes we put on tiny plays just to remember that we are still human. In the evenings, Mabel quietly sings old hymns. Grandpa Ben taps rhythms on his knees with his palms, and I close my eyes and dream that the barack is a church without walls. By the fire, it smells of corn and bitter tobacco. I listen to the crackling flames and whisper, "Does God hear those whose names have been stolen?" But not every night is peaceful. One time the moon shone so brightly that shadows fell in long ribbons. We were hiding a small bundle of food at the edge of the field for Samuel, who had run away after the whip left a red mark on his back, like a snake. We believed he would reach the river, where the water flows free. In the morning, they brought him back. He walked barefoot in caked blood and never lifted his eyes. The master said it was a lesson for all. I stared at the ground and heard every blow. Then it became so silent that my heart rang. From that day, the faces around me cracked like dried clay. Mabel sang no more. Grandpa Ben coughed at night and whispered that his lungs were tearing like old cloth. And the master's son came more often to the sewing room. He would finger the ribbons and ask if I loved velvet. His palm would fall on my shoulder heavy as stone. In those moments, I prayed without words, asking not for my own salvation, but for the fire inside me not to die. I collected tiny treasures to remember: a shard of blue glass from a broken bottle, a red cardinal's feather, a button from the mistress's daughter's dress. I buried them under the barack floor, like seeds. I believed one day a road would grow from them. Where that road led, I did not know, but every time the whip cracked, I pressed my hand to the boards and felt an unknown heart beating beneath the wood. And inside me lives the secret of an underground passage. The plantation house stands on bricks like on long legs. Between those legs, dark corridors hide. One day, I found a narrow gap under the stairs, where the air smelled of damp earth. Water drips down there. Maybe a river under the house whispers the way out. Sometimes at night, I touch the wall and feel the house sigh with me. I have not yet dared to go down. Today, I embroider these words with a needle on the hem of my old dress. If they sell me like they sold Mabel, I will take the dress with me. Let the one who finds it hear the whisper of time. I do not know if I will see another dawn, but I know inside me a light lives. It smolders like a coal under ashes. My name is Rosalind, but my heart is called freedom. Can you hear my voice through the planks of the centuries? If you can, it means the chains have already begun to crack. I hear how the night stirs beyond the thin wall of the barack, as if darkness itself is searching for a crack to settle deeper inside. But I am not afraid of the dark. I am afraid of the light, which flares up suddenly when the heavy door swings open and the lamp ignites in the master's son's hand. The light exposes our faces, without masks. It shimmers on sweat-slicked skin, on frozen tears, on the deathly gray lips of weary women. In those moments, the heart sinks to the very bottom, and something inside me whispers, "Remember, Rosalind, this too shall pass." Yesterday he took Karma, the girl who laughed louder than the wind. She laughed, and that meant she forgot herself. First, her screams reached us, and then muffled sobs. In the morning Karma returned, but she was like an empty shell. Her voice had faded, her eyes had turned to glass. When I touched her shoulder, it flinched as if burned, and she turned away. Then I understood. A brand is not only left on the skin. Yet as long as she breathes, a spark still smolders within her, and I gave myself a vow to protect that spark. At night, when the moon hid behind the clouds, we gathered again by the dying fire. Grandpa Ben could barely catch his breath, his cough tearing him apart from within. He said, "Every soul is like a river. It cannot be smothered, even if you bury it under stones. It will simply carve a new path." His words struck like nails, and I felt resolve stir within me. After a meal of corn stew, I took a needle and thread, hid them under my sleeve, and went into the big house. It smelled of lavender soap, candle wax, and something I would call sorrow behind the curtains. The mistress sat in a chair, the tall fireplace casting copper glints in her hair. She asked me to mend a silk collar. While sewing, I noticed a book on the table with the image of a bird. My heart sank. The cover was made of exactly the same blue glass as the shard buried under the floor. I quietly asked myself, is this not a sign? Suddenly, the mistress asked if I dreamed of my own home. I lowered my gaze. A slave is not supposed to dream. But the mistress seemed to listen not to words, but to the silence. She ran her finger over the fresh seam and whispered, "It hurts where it cannot be mended." For a moment, I saw human pain flicker in her eyes, and I realized she was trapped in gold as tightly as I was trapped in chains. Late that night, I took Karma by the hand and led her to the crack under the stairs. The stone blocks were damp, and the mold smelled of cold. The three of us, Karma, Grandpa Ben's whisper, and I, descended the steps gnawed by time. The dark corridor stretched ahead like a black snake. Beneath my fingers, rough brick; beneath my feet, puddles where the faint glimmer of our candle trembled. But our path was blocked by heavy iron, a barred door overgrown with cobwebs. Karma whimpered softly, and I felt a stab of rage, not at the metal, but at the despair growing stronger than hope. I grabbed the bars, pulled until the skin split, but the door only rattled. Then I pressed my forehead to the cold iron and exhaled, "Lord, you gave us a heart, now open the stone." In response, silence, so deep I could hear the drip of water. We returned upstairs, but not empty-handed. I hid an old, rusty key found by the threshold in my pocket. I do not know if it will fit, but I hold it as a promise. Karma clutched a shard of a mirror in her hands, a piece where the candle's reflection danced. To remember our own faces, she whispered. The next day began with a funeral. Grandpa Ben did not wake up. His body lay light as a feather, but his fingers were clenched as if he had held on to an invisible rope until the very end. The master ordered him buried behind the stables, without prayer. We stood off to the side. The wind tossed dry leaves across the ground, and to me, they seemed like lines from an unseen book. When the earth closed over him, Karma softly sang a hymn, and her voice no longer trembled. Then I realized A spark can be hidden even inside a song. In the evening, the master's son summoned me to his study. The fireplace blazed, but his gaze was colder than the water in a well. He said that the fair was coming soon, and that quiet hands fetched a high price. His fingers slid along my cheek like a knife across silk. Everything inside me clenched, and again I saw that barred door. Was it fate pushing me forward? Later, under the cover of stars, I dreamed that one day the night would open like a curtain, and we would leave along the underground river. I touched the key. The rust crumbled, but the steel still lived. As long as the steel had not turned to dust, I would not give up. Now I scratched these words with charcoal on the back of the coarse linen tag bearing the number of my soul. If the letter burns, the wind will carry away the ash, and the wind will whisper to someone else. Listen, descendant, even if the door is made of iron, your heart is made of light. It will find a crack. Can you hear my breath? If you can, it means the road beneath us is already breathing freedom. Sometimes the darkness grows so thick that even your own skin feels foreign, as if it was chosen for you by mistake. That night, after the conversation in the study, I did not sleep a single minute. I lay on the bunk, heard Karma tossing nearby, heard the wind tearing tiny splinters from the barack walls, and whispered to Grandpa Ben into the void, as if he were still sitting by the fire. I asked him, "How do you tell a step of fate from a step of fear?" The answer came in the groaning of the boards. Try, and you will know. At dawn, the air smelled of an approaching storm, even though the sky still seemed empty. I stepped into the yard before the bell sounded, sneaking carefully toward the kitchen. There, a pot always boils with water for coffee robusta, and steam lays a thin mist on the glass. I pretended to look for a rag, while quietly sliding aside the heavy copper lid of the salt barrel. At the bottom, beneath a mound of white crystals, lay my rusty key. I had hidden it there the night before. Now it smelled of iron and hope. "What are you circling around for?" "My shadow," came the voice of the cook. Elsie, her round face was tired, but her eyes shone with curiosity. I could not trust her, but I did not want to remain silent either. In a whisper, I told her about the underground passage. Elsie wiped her hands on her apron, leaned closer, and, as if weighing every word, replied, "In an old house, there is always a hidden throat. Just remember, the mouth that swallows us may not spit us out." She told me she had seen a wooden panel in the pantry, slightly different in its pattern. "Perhaps," she said, "a lever was hidden there." She said it casually, and then went to break ice for the master's drinks, as if helping a prisoner find a way into another world was the most ordinary thing. During the day, the heat pressed down like a heavy blanket. In the field, the cotton leaves crackled like dry paper. I worked, but my thoughts were deeper than the earth. With every stitch of the needle, I mapped the route in my memory: kitchen, corridor, pantry, lever, underground air. My heart beat in rhythm. 1, 2, step, step. Toward evening, a commotion rose in the stables. The master had brought a new horse and was whipping it to show his strength. The horse stomped, and sprays of sweat flew into the straw. The master laughed, savoring his power. But suddenly the animal jerked sharply, and the whip flew from his hand, striking the master's son squarely. He cried out like a child. For a second, power cracked like glass, and I realized even chains are held only by thin strings of fear. That night, Karma came to me with the shard of the mirror. Moonlight flashed across her face. "Look," she said, "when I turn it like this, I see a corridor between the kitchen and the pantry. In the reflection, a faint glimmer, as if a lamp is behind the wall. I think there is emptiness there." We agreed. Tomorrow, when the mistress went to the seamstress in town, we would check the panel. In the morning, I took a bucket, pretending I was going for ashes, and Karma carried a basket of laundry. The house smelled of wax and candied peaches. We walked silently, like cats over the floorboards. The pantry loomed like a narrow sack. I ran my hand along the wall. One plank was slightly shorter than the others. I pressed. It did not budge. Then I remembered the key. My heart jumped. What use is a board if a lock is needed? My gaze fell on a bronze latch near the floor, hidden by a sack of flour. I inserted the key. The screech of metal was muffled by the pounding in my ears. The plank shifted, revealing a black crack. We froze. From there came the smell of dampness and a distant candle. "There will be no way back," whispered Karma. "There never was," I replied. But at that moment, a shout from the master's son rang out from above. We hastily slid the panel back into place and pretended to be searching for a shelf of spices. He stared for a long time, suspiciously, his gaze flickering between us and the wall. Then he smiled that same bored smile and ordered us to bring fresh bread for dinner. After he left, my hands trembled, but inside me rang a fierce joy. We had found the door. The night promised a storm. Clouds gathered like an army. Back at the barack, I told the others, Elsie, Karma, and 3 more. Some were afraid, some doubtful, but each warmed a tiny spark of faith inside. We agreed. In 2 days, when the moon hid, we would descend. At dawn, I stitched more words into the hem. "If I go, know this, freedom smells of wet earth and rusty iron. And now I speak to you, who hears this whisper across the years. If you see a seam on the hem of an old dress, rip it open without fear. There you will find a map stitched with threads of hope. And remember, a door can be heavy, but the key is born in the heart." The noise of the storm grew. The sky rumbled like an ancient drum, summoning the spirits of change. Nails in the roof creaked, boards trembled, and I thought, the house is afraid of the coming night too. The rain had not yet poured down, but the smell of damp earth already spread along the rows of cotton, promising to hide our steps. In the morning, I sewed a traveling sack, thin canvas from flour bags, a strong seam hidden inside. Into it, I placed everything that carried light: a shard of blue glass, a cardinal's feather, a rusty key, and a small icon of the Virgin Mary that Karma had once found in the yard. We agreed to take nothing extra, only memory and hope. The day dragged on like thick honey. Heavy air clung to the fields, sticky moisture beaded on the skin, and cotton leaves stuck to our sleeves, as if asking a final question. "Where are you going?" I answered without words, "To where it will be easy to breathe." After supper, the mistress went to town, and all the servants gathered in the kitchen under the pretext of washing kettles. Elsie handed each of us a hot corn pie wrapped in a cloth like a treasure. People ate in silence, their eyes wandering toward doors and windows, listening to every rustle. Karma stood beside me, clutching the shard of mirror as if it could deflect any blow. When the bell struck the 10th hour, the rain burst down in thin needles, and the Paxton clan settled to sleep under the drumming of the drops. Outside, the darkness steamed. I pulled an old blanket over my shoulders and whispered to Karma, "It is time." We left the barack, 6 of us. Elsie, Karma, me, the quiet boy Rhymes, the strong woodsman Jed, and the silent Sybil with her child in her arms. The others did not dare. They wept and crossed themselves at the door, giving us half of their food. In their eyes, I saw not fear, but a heavy forgiveness. If we disappeared, they would have to endure the master's wrath. Through the rain, we ran to the kitchen. The floor gave under our steps as we lifted the sack of flour and opened the panel. The air smelled of dampness and old mud. Karma lit a short candle. Jed went down first, helping the others. I stepped down last, closed the panel, and the house above became a deafened echo. The storm now sounded like a distant roar. The corridor was low. We moved hunched over. The ground squelched underfoot, rotted planks surfaced now, and then cobwebs clung everywhere, threads brushing our faces, tangling breath. The boy Rhymes whimpered, but Sybil stroked his hair, and he fell silent. In the distance, a faint circle of light appeared, an air shaft. The corridor forked there. I raised the candle, and the key caught its weak flicker. To the right, the corridor sloped sharply downward. To the left, it rose, and there was the sound of running water. We chose the noise. It is easier to hide tracks in water. The passage narrowed. We had to go single file. Tall Jed led the way, pushing boards aside with his shoulders. I followed, and suddenly felt the ground give way beneath me. A board cracked, my leg slipped into emptiness, the sharp edge scraping my skin. A cry tore from my lips, but Jed grabbed my hand in time. In the dark flashed the thought, if I fall, I will remain where no one will ever find me. I bit my lips until they bled, pushed my free leg against the edge of the plank, and pulled myself out. Jed whispered with his lips, "Hold on, sister." We moved on, more carefully. The ceiling wept with drops, and the key in my hand grew slippery. After a few minutes, the corridor led to a wooden door, reinforced with iron. Thick rust covered the bolt, but the latch was intact. I pressed the key to it. First try. Screeching. Second. Silence. Third. A click, so quiet I thought I heard my own heart. But the latch yielded. The door shuddered and released a burst of cold air. Beyond, water gurgled. A narrow stream, but alive. It flowed among stones into the darkness. Jed packed the pies into a cloth sling on his back. We stepped into the flow, icy water up to our ankles, but with every step, the dust of slavery washed away. I lifted my dress to my knees. The blood on my leg washed off almost immediately, and the wound burned, smelling of freedom. The tunnel led outward. We could feel the fresh wind, and every chest swelled with impatience. But suddenly light struck from above. A lantern. Someone was outside. Jed slipped into the shadow, signaling us to crouch. Across the riverbank, people shouted coarse words. Dogs barked. I caught the cry. Slaves escaped. Raise everyone. Awareness hit like a whip. They were hunting us. Then Karma raised the shard of mirror, caught the beam of the lantern, and flung it into the eyes of one of the dogs. The dog yelped, the light veered, and we rushed forward. My foot slipped on the stones, water splashed, but I heard only my pounding pulse. The corridor led to a gaping mouth, large boards broken open by the storm. We spilled out into a forest thicket, where the rain fell in a solid wall. Branches lashed our faces, but the smell of pine and fresh earth was sweet, like the first bread after hunger. Behind us, voices roared, but the rain muffled the sound. We ran until our breathing became a hot mist. When the shouting died, we stopped under the wide spread of a cedar tree. Elsie unwrapped her bundle of pies, broke off a piece for everyone. The taste of corn, mixed with rain and blood, felt like a feast. Sybil pressed her child against her chest, and in his breathing was just enough peace to believe we were alive. We did not know where the river was, where north was, or any road at all. But I lifted my head to the sky. Rare flashes of lightning lit the rain, and it seemed to me that our ancestors were lighting torches to show the way. I pressed my hand to my chest where the key lay beneath the cloth. It was no longer needed but would remain proof. There had been a door, and we had opened it. If you hear my whisper across the years, know this: the heaviest door yields to a quiet heart. We are not yet free, but we are no longer slaves. In each of us, a flame burns, and no storm can extinguish it. The rain quieted only by dawn, as if it had grown tired of chasing us. Mist wove itself between the trees, hiding the world in silence. The forest breathed like a great beast, damp moss stirred underfoot, and invisible wings rustled in the branches. We trudged until our legs filled with lead. Then Jed raised his hand, the signal to stop, and we froze in the thicket. Karma crouched down, extended her palm. A large drop fell directly into the center of her hand, and she smiled, strangely, calmly. We found shelter beneath the roots of a fallen cedar. Inside, it smelled of rotting wood and mushrooms, but it was dry. Elsie laid Sybil's child on folded jackets. I looked around. Thin strips of light cut through the fog, as if someone had sliced the gray fabric with invisible scissors. We were so far away that the baying of hounds was now only an echo in memory, but my heart drummed. Freedom, too, could choke you if inhaled too sharply. Jed pulled out a corn pie, broke it into 6 pieces. Wet hands trembled, but the pieces were passed around without argument. When the warm crumb touched my tongue, I heard Grandpa Ben's voice inside me. Even the smallest crumb feeds many souls if gratitude lives in it. I closed my eyes and, for the first time, allowed myself to imagine tomorrow. In that tomorrow, there would be no brutal cry of the morning bell, no heavy ropes on our shoulders. In that tomorrow, shoulders would rise not from fear, but from the wind. While the others dozed, I stepped outside. The world was milk gray, as if someone had spilled a bowl of oatmeal across the sky. I plucked a thin twig from a bush and ran it across the fresh scratch on my leg. The pain answered with a quiet heat, but the bleeding had stopped. The wound had closed, as if the forest itself had stitched my body back together. Looking at the trunks growing into one another, I realized freedom is not about escape. It is about putting down roots where once you were denied earth. Returning to the shelter, I noticed a barely visible trail, trampled not by humans but by deer. Hoofprints led northeast, where, according to Elsie, there was a great river. A river is a road, no matter whose hands claim it. But before I could lead the others, I needed to breathe courage into them. I remembered Karma's words. The mirror shard holds a face. Perhaps if a person sees themselves, they remember why they walk forward. I returned and quietly woke Karma. She opened her eyes, where fear still lived, mixed with fire. I laid my hand on her forehead and said, "Look, sister, the moss is thicker on the north side of the trunks. The moss will lead us to the river." Karma touched my wrist and nodded. We woke the others. Sybil's child cried without sound. Air had run out in his throat. Elsie gently patted his back, and a soft, rasping breath restored balance to the world. We followed the deer trail. With every mile, the forest lightened, the fir trees retreated, and in the clearings, tall grass appeared. I felt how the sun slowly warmed the wet fabric clinging to my back, how the ground stopped squelching and gave way to a soft bed of leaves. At one point, Karma stopped, tilted her head back. Between the branches, a patch of blue sky shone, clear as the shard of glass I had once buried under the floor. I smiled. God gives signs to those who know how to see them. By noon, we heard splashing. At first, barely audible, like a bird's wing beating the water, then clearer, a distinct noise. A river. It did not appear suddenly. We seemed to walk into the threshold of its breathing. The air here smelled of silt and wild iris blooms. But joy mingled with fear. Across the water could be any master, any hunter. On the shore, we found an overturned boat, cracked all over, but the beams were intact. Jed knelt, knocked on the hull. The sound was hollow but strong. He looked at me, a question without words. I nodded. If fate placed a boat beneath our feet, we must sail. We pushed it into the water. A brook flowing from the hill filled the bottom with cold. Our legs shivered, but fear gave way to resolve. When the boat pushed off from the shore, I sat at the bow, holding the key in my fist. It was warm, as if the metal had absorbed the blood of my hands. Water whispered against the sides, stitching a new fabric of our path. Midway across the river, the wind struck suddenly, tossing our hair, and in that rush, I heard the last cry from the past. "Come back!" The voices dissolved in the splash of the water. And then, for the first time, I allowed myself to lift my eyes to the sky without fear. A black kite circled above, seeking prey, but the sun blazed brighter than its shadow. I tightened my grip on the key and, without looking back, threw it into the depths. The metal flashed one last time and disappeared. "Why," whispered Elsie. "Doors are no longer needed," I answered. "Let the river keep the memory." The boat glided forward, and I thought about how the water knows how to gather other people's stories, carry them from shore to shore, and whisper them to those who know how to listen. I laid my hand on the cold surface, closed my eyes, and whispered, "If my words reach the future, let them tell this. Chains do not break in the forge, they break in the heart." We sailed until the sun touched the treetops, and the sky was dusted with gold. I turned to Karma. On her face, the sunset light reflected, and I saw the fear was gone. Only expectation remained. Do you hear the whisper in the ripple of this river? If you do, guard it. It belongs to all those once called shadows. The evening wind filled the sails of our shirts, as if the very air had decided to become wings. The quiet splashing faded as the river widened, turning into a smooth mirror. We did not know whose shore awaited us or what laws ruled there, but for the first time, not one of us looked back. Beneath our feet, the boat creaked softly, like an old friend carrying us with its last strength into another life. In the distance, beyond reed-covered shallows, a light flickered. Maybe it was a runaways campfire, maybe the eye of a watchman. Jed gripped the oar, ready to turn. I raised my hand, not out of fear, but because I understood freedom is not always a bright path. Sometimes it is a journey into darkness where you must ignite your own flame. We froze in the middle of the river, catching the scent of smoke and the whine of mosquitoes. The silence was broken by a child's whimper. Sybil pressed her son close, and the sound faded to a whisper. In that tiny heartbeat lived the entire reason for our flight, so that a small heart would not grow up in chains. I looked at Karma. She pulled out the mirror shard, lifted it to the sky. Its glint skimmed across the water, merging with the reflection of the moon. And suddenly, I saw my own eyes, filled with unexpected calm. I realized, no matter where we landed, I was no longer the same person who had started this path. The light on the far shore wavered and disappeared behind the trees. We decided to continue, letting the night hide our trail. The boat glided forward like a line written on the vast letter of the world. The wind smelled of wild mint and wet bark, and every drop on my skin felt like a blessing. I remembered the shard of blue glass buried under the barack floor. Perhaps one day someone would find it and hear the faint clinking of chains that had been the first word of my life. Let the whisper remind them. Even broken things can be used to build a road. If you ever find yourself on a nameless river and hear the water whispering in the dark, listen closely. Maybe it is us, sailing past, shadows turned into light. Do not be silent. Pass it on. Freedom begins where the heart refuses to answer to a name that is not its own.